Part 5, Conditio Humana. Essay on the life of the artist. Heretics, Wastrels, Falls/Cases, Inhabitants. They come from far away, from sultry mountain villages and evil market towns, where festivals have fallen into neglect and curses hold sway. They first raised their heads 3,000 years ago, earlier than the rest. They felt something new was in the air. Unlike all their ancestors, these people would live in towns and cities. The villages and tribes would not have the whole future to themselves. Emotional spaces expanded as if to make room for larger worlds. From the hills above, royal and bourgeois views lit up the expanded universe. Generals look at things like that, and shamans who see beyond the horizon. The cities were not yet built, but humans were already looking towards the spacious areas that would be filled with cities. The prophets and founders were the first to see that it was only from the perspective of the cities that the world would become the totality, the biggest. Their visions showed a type of human being whose secure integration into the new, bigger world would demand all the forces of the future. The flood of obsession would be dammed, and the wickedness and ecstasies of the old country would no longer reach their former heights. A permanent interior mainland arose, where ideas were established like early settlements at river fords. Cities, knowledge, and enterprises could grow there. A humorous, enterprising type of person gathered at the temples to worship gods of thoughtfulness inside them. The divine itself seemed to want to be clever with ever-watchful eyes, light, and shared knowledge. The eternal witnesses of the world were enthroned in their heady vigil on the heights. The atmosphere of the polis was pervaded with a permanent atmosphere of cleverness that felt natural among city people. The city dweller was somebody who could absorb the sense of being close to such clear-thinking divinities. A wakeful atmosphere radiated over the city from the Acropolis like a beautiful alarm that summoned the spirits of the citizens together under the same sky. The daily business was a competition of clarity, the speeches and conversation, a constant test of what can stand communal discussion. Childish, rural, befuddled faith disintegrated in this acidic medium. If the gods themselves had subscribed to wakefulness and knowledge in such a new and all-pervading manner, how should their human imitators fail to follow them? To believe differently in a different god. This mission, which was understood by the brightest individuals of the old city, marked the beginning of the history of a cleverness that still has an impact on the arts to this day. During a metamorphosis that lasted 2,000 years, the adventure of heresy shifted from priests to philosophers, and from the latter to artists, the last inheritors of the urban quest for the powerful, effective, true, and good. Philosophy arose when the Greek magicians, the iatromancers, or clairvoyant doctors of the age of trances and magic, settled in the cities and learned to obey the rules of urban mediation. What was wisdom then? What was the good life? Being able to inquire into the conditions of happiness in view of the horrors of the world. This mission became the benchmark for the Greek spirit. When Socrates appeared before his judges, he embodied the discussion on the dimensions of heresy. An individual man was responsible for a way of being entering the stage of ideas. What was on trial before the court was not so much the crime of godlessness formulated by the conventional prosecutors. The charge was against the interior mobility of a different faith, which the believers in the old faith suspected of showing disbelief. Solid people, those who were not open to seduction, did not understand what Socrates was doing in his seductive inquiries. They saw him as the brooding monster seeking reasons for what was holy, hidden, and fundamental. Wasn't such thinking a crime in itself? Who, if not a serious criminal, would dare to demand reasons for the world's reasons? It was really uncanny that this man, without giving any ultimate reason, came close to the final causes, almost like a demon. Wasn't he acting as if the final causes were dependent on what he said? Socrates had understood that this versatile and deep, inscrutable faith actually embodied the principle of urban cleverness, and this fact alone illustrates his superiority over his judges. He could play the part of the model citizen of his city and still remain the monstrous inhabitant of an opposing world. That is why at the end of his defence speech he pronounced the words that mark the formal opening of the history of heresy. He, Socrates, didn't believe in the gods? For if, O men of Athens, by force of persuasion and entreaty, I could overpower your oaths, then I should be teaching you to believe that there are no gods, and convict myself in my own defence of not believing in them. But that is not the case, for I do believe that there are gods, and in a far higher sense than that in which any of my accusers believe in them. And to you, and to God, I commit my cause, to be determined by you as is best for you and me. This is how pious impiety began explaining itself, believing like no one else. In this closing speech, dissidence appeared as the natural element for the urban style of cleverness. This is the prototypical scene of modernity. An intelligence explained with all the force of the first time that it was gambling its own life on the wide open spaces of experimentation. Indeed, it assured its listeners that they were also free to do so if only they behaved consciously as what they were, city dwellers, people with the power of speech, mortals gifted with reason, people experimenting with a different life. A post-natural, meta-cosmic existence in the light of acropolitics, the politics of the Acropolis. I do not believe like any of my accusers. This phrase marked the critical moment in the world revolution of the soul. Faith, the taking of clear steps forward into what is hidden, ceased to be based on submission and allied with the lively turbulence and logical light of the soul that never stops thinking. But what is this light except the interior of the life that has awoken in the world alarm of the city? The philosopher, of course, the ex-shaman, who still bears the signs of earlier initiations, introduced heresy and a different kind of magic to the world at the same time. From then on, souls were no longer tied to Mother Earth and burdened with missions. Release or delivery became the catchword of a different kind of magic, and its agenda was to make people cheerful. The motivating idea was to investigate the number of approaches to happiness and exits from the false life. The departure from all kinds of caves, from their misery and numbness, began in the city. Because the city is the place of decision-making about unequal people without destinies, it is here that the difference between happy and unhappy people first comes to be voiced. What are human beings essentially? Are they poor or rich? Oppressed or privileged? Beasts of burden or darlings of the gods? Humans began to reveal their nature in the answers they gave to these questions. To be is to reply is to be. Spirits and destinies part company under the summary law of answers. An irreducible difference separates mortals from each other in a very confined space. From the time it was no longer possible to mould human beings into unified statements, Sophocles' tragic chorus could declare that there are many monstrous things in the world, but nothing as monstrous as human beings. Ordinary citizens think of human beings as poor creatures in a situation of overwhelming scarcity, striving for wealth. They see human beings as animals that always lack something. This is how solidly based beings talk about themselves, and citizens swamped by scarcity still follow their example to this day. Contrast this with the generous thinking of those who cast different spells, who seek not to explain human beings but to surprise them instead. For them, humans are animals with too much wealth that come into the world to burden themselves. The best example of this species is the type who practices divine tolerance, whose soul goes through extremes. If people have a hard time, it is not because they have inherited misery, but because they are prepared to buckle down when there is scarcity. Closer to the gods than to the animals. The rich, the uncanny, and the well-travelled take their chances in wrestling with matter and suffering. Abundance and success make their life monstrous. As they are at home in the heights, they ridicule further steps upwards. Assignments and areas of activity are always below them. As citizens of the real city, they are also inhabitants of an inexhaustible interior space that is nothing but the playing field for possible clever moves. When these city magicians turned artists come forward with a work, a fine phrase or a trick, they always gamble with the whence of their gesture. They openly reveal their intangibility by employing signs that come from the region of reasons. When there is more wakefulness than stuff to fill it, the hour of irony has struck. It is a spontaneous objection to the unreasonable idea of believing in positive dictates. It hovers in the air, changing the importance of everything. No object can match its breadth, not even a pompous total world philosophy. The alternative magician does not have visions. He or she actually floats in front of every structure. Works, actions, images, worlds, what is all that except material that is useful for marching through the wide expanses? The artists of the different faith create structures that are evidently not the work of people on their knees. Each work is endowed with something of the spatiality that has been part of its making. The works always tell us that for the producers the serious problem is that of becoming small as opposed to becoming big. The floating creature that drifts towards the world from its formless state has no other means of revealing itself than by repeatedly becoming externalized in the structure. By working through the first steps to learn the alphabet, it shows the transformational power in which it always rediscovers its life. It follows that sustainability is something that great art never lacks. By ceaselessly changing, the alternative magicians exhale the space from which they receive everything. Its scope is more familiar to them than their visible work. They could forget everything they have created except the sphere from which creation originates and continues. By increasing the stock of phenomena, they are acting as sponsors of the visible world. Among the countless people who have opted in advance for a life of poverty, they remain the last and the only rich ones. What they squander is the experience of every gesture that determines form, that has a value and derives from a surplus. They have a power when tackling themes, a restlessness in relation to the defined line, a brightness in relation to colour. If they were philosophers, they would be concerned with telling the world about its breadth. Wealth is the ability to decide on options for special things. Rich is the mood that does not lose height when it succumbs to trivia. Without pride and without theories, it confirms its freedom to cross the lowlands, like the devil crosses the sacred halls. How is it that the world is everything that is the case? We know least of all about the motion that we are. Did tradition teach us that it was the fall of man that makes us suffer the world? Falling is the motion that crosses the world, and to which wakeful human life as such is subject. Anybody who falls suffers the absolute passion that cannot be overcome, unless by falling. The world is the container of all falls. Like a dark force of attraction, it exerts a gravitational pull over the beings that have just come into the world, whereby they learn about resistances. Anybody who falls gets hurt and feels pain and rebellion. For this reason, every fall has to be a compromise between anger and patience. Anger helps the ego that has become entangled in the world not to give up under the weight of dead things. Patience, on the other hand, protects the world inside us from the revenge of the nothingness with which we wanted to undo the trauma of existence. People who learn through suffering how to curb their fury can become patient labourers. Work creates a separation of powers and despair. At the same time, the patience that counteracts the anger is a continuation of pre-existential sovereignty by other means. It introduces a trace of the old floating vastness into the tumult of life. Is there another definition for the life of an artist than creating a chain of intense days across decades to keep a labour force on track? Art, as the work of those who work differently, is always work on the fall or the case. The artists who represent their fall show the brutality of the world and the absence of presuppositions for our falling apart so glaringly because falls cannot be achieved skillfully. Everything in works of art that is raw and luminous and necessarily belongs to the present emphasizes the materiality of the world as it appears in free fall. When it comes to falls, all the details are the same. When they come into view, we always have to confront the same idea, that this is reality, that a clenched fist is punching our eye, making it feel that whatever may be present is asserting its power. Only from this perspective can early forms appear as complete pictures, finds as works, works as raw materials, coincidences as perpetrators, deeds as drifting, and processes as gestures. The same particularity of the world is at work in all these things. Our eyes are constantly stopped in their tracks by visible things that exist as limits. The whole brutality of the world is contained in the stopping, which is a reason why modern art gets closer to the exigency of being than anything has, since the magical cave paintings. Painters who use their fall as the theme of works and series necessarily notice over time how, viewed roughly, things look the same. A person falling out of the window is equally indifferent to the facades he has fallen past, and the scenes of life behind the windows he glimpses as he falls. He is so deeply involved in the naked situation that it makes no sense for him to imagine something deeper underlying a phenomenon. What is the first thing now? What is the second? The phenomenon is the depth itself. Art put into freefall is infused with the equal depth of phenomenal things. But what may look like a guide to indifference towards everything is actually a kind of exercise in the power of experience that goes to extremes to expose itself to the diverse views of the world and their enhancement in the works of art. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote that angels are not like physical creatures in space, but that they create out of themselves the space that they illuminate and animate with their essence. In the 20th century, Merleau-Ponty wrote the words that should be the starting point for every discussion about humans' sensual being in the world. The body is not in space, it inhabits space. Le corps n'est pas dans l'espace, il l'habite. It is the great artists who, then as now, leave the truth of this statement open. As inhabitants of the world's depths, they remind us to ask how we inhabit the world house in the first place. When we are in the world, is it like being settled inside our own four walls? Have we been given everything that is the case to constitute a home? Ready for moving in, ready for furnishing, like a being ready for occupation, and we only have to settle in and pay our instalments. Whoever is an artist would always answer such questions in the negative. He or she has faced the dilemma of living in a non-house since time immemorial. Artists are the ecologists of uncanny things, the resident doubters, the people who live differently. That they live among things means cooperating with emergent forms, whether from nature or culture or from the cosmos of scientific signs and models. The house of those who live differently is full of foreign guests. It is a point in the world grid, a magic number, an observation point looking onto crude colours. The master of the house himself moves around in his realm as if in the laboratory of a mad inventor. If the guests are willing to join in the rich conversation to be had among his creations, they may take up residence in works of art. What the artist in his workshop offers them is nothing less than admittance to a paradise in which the oldest elixir of happiness still flows today. Attention.